listening to the podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns.
Hello and welcome into the podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your guest host for today's episode, Nick Gryniewicz. I'm the Vice President at True Native Media, and today we are doing a bit of a celebration episode. Of course, my guest is the founder and CEO of True Native Media. She is Heather Osgood. This is the 10-year anniversary special episode here on Podcast Advertising Playbook. Heather, congratulations on 10 years, of course, and I am honored to be the one to sit here and kind of recap the last 10 years with you.
Well, I'm honored that you're here, Nick. It was so special yesterday in our staff meeting because the team put together a video about the last 10 years, which was kind of crazy. And it is kind of strange to imagine that I have been doing this for a decade.
Absolutely. You're right. You mentioned the video that we put together yesterday, and I've been with the company now for a little over 4 years. And I was kind of thinking about all of the people that have kind of come through True Native Media in the time that I've been here. Of course, you founded the company. It's been in existence for 10 years. When you think back to 2016 and the early days of True Native Media, what stands out most vividly about those first few months? Like what do you remember when you decided to found the company and kind of those first early days?
Yeah. It's so interesting. Obviously, anytime you start something, you have to start at the beginning, right? And I bootstrapped the organization. I had been in ad sales and I knew that I could sell podcast advertising. At least I thought I could sell podcast advertising, but I had a lot of confidence. And at that point, I think, when you're starting something new, having a level of determination is super important. And I think I still have a really high level of determination, but that stands out to me. The other thing that stands out to me is how little I knew about what I was actually selling. When we go back to 2016, all of the ads were embedded ads. And when I started, I pulled the classic podcaster move because I would, essentially I would call up podcasters and say, hey, is it okay if I sell ads on your show? And they were like, sure, that sounds good. At that point, I didn't have a lot of contracts. I didn't have exclusivity or anything. I was just like, hey, if you say I can sell ads, I'm just going to call people until I can find someone who says they want to buy an ad. But I didn't realize at that point that, oh, wait, we're just selling the downloads on this one episode. So I would talk to the podcaster and they would say, oh, yeah, we've had 100,000 downloads on the show and we get, 20,000 downloads a month or whatever. And I would think, oh, those are huge, great, big numbers. I'm going to sell those, not realizing that it was like, oh, that is an ad in just one episode. And oh, you're getting 500 listens like per episode. And so I really didn't know what I was doing for sure. It took me a minute and it took, people in the industry kind of pulling me aside and saying, no, this is how this works. And I think that, that just really stands out to me that I really didn't know what I was doing. But obviously, just like anything in life, you learn as you go.
What have been some of the biggest shifts you've seen in advertising behavior from 2016 to 2026? I'm sure you've seen a lot because I've been working with you since 2021 and I've seen a lot. So I'm sure the industry has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, it has changed tremendously. And I would say that if we're looking at advertiser behavior is certainly something that is a symptom of, what is around that. And the technology in podcasting has just come so far. And I get frustrated sometimes because it hasn't come as far as I would like it to have come. But really, when I think about the last 10 years, the advancements that have been made are really quite large. So the biggest, of course, is dynamic ad insertion, being able to monetize all of the impressions that a show receives, not just in that one episode, like I was just talking about, I think has been really big. Also, just, I think that the savviness of ad buyers has improved really exponentially. So there are still a lot of agencies and a lot of brands who are new to podcast ads. And we still, of course, don't have the financial footprint that I think we should have as an industry. But those that are buying podcasts and really know the industry have just become so much more savvy. I think, the targeting has really improved. DAI, of course, has allowed us to do this, but our advertisers now are very clear about, do they want all of the international, global impressions that can be provided, or do they just want US impressions? Pixel tracking has made a huge difference. Being able to see who listens to a podcast and then makes a purchasing decision. And then reporting too, being able to really kind of see what the campaign has done in terms of, from a delivery perspective. All of those things I think have really changed in the last 10 years and really ultimately have made the medium stronger and made the industry stronger.
Yeah, I think as you see more and more dollars flow into podcast advertising, what was the report? It was over a $3 billion industry in 2025, correct?
Mhm.
And I've seen that triple in my time with True Native Media, and a lot of that does have to do with, of course, more brands coming in, but they're coming in because the technology is allowing more ease of purchase and, of course, more information. I think over the last 10 years, especially as you mentioned. It was not quite as clear. Okay, is this working? How is this working? And
Mhm.
now there is a much clearer idea of that.
Mhm.
Think back to the day when you first started selling host-read ads. How did you explain host-read advertising to people back then, and what made you so confident in that model? Because many that got into podcast advertising, it was, more recently it's been programmatic, but host-read is really where the industry has been built.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know at what point native advertising kind of peaked, but when I was starting True Native Media, there, was Alex Bloomberg's podcast startup, which I really, really loved and listened to religiously. And I was listening to the show before I started True Native, and one of the things that really struck me was that their ad reads were done so well, and they really weren't. I wouldn't even say they were ad reads because they were like 5-minute segments in the program. And I remember listening to the ads and thinking that it was content and not realizing that it was an ad until of course they got into it. And then I would think, oh, this is an ad. Wow, this is amazing. And Alex talked a lot about native advertising on the show, and why podcast ads were so powerful was because they were native. And I remember, that's the reason that I named the company True Native Media. And it's funny because I think sometimes it's lost on people. They don't really understand the native side of things. But for me, really that connection of the host with the audience. And I've always thought about advertising as, kind of this tactic of shouting at your audience or shouting at your consumer, like, hey, I'm over here, look at my company, buy my product, buy my stuff. And nobody likes that, right? We've never, as individuals, we don't respond to that, but we do respond when somebody that we know, like, and trust says, hey, this is a pretty cool product, you should buy it. And so for me, I think that really resonated with me. I also remember, and this is, gosh, going way back, I'm sure way before your time, Nick, but when I was a kid, my dad would come home at lunch, and he would listen to Paul Harvey. And Paul Harvey had a daily radio show. Frankly, I don't even remember what the show was about, but I remember the ad reads that he would do. And that I think also translated into, even today, when I sold radio ads, it wasn't uncommon for the radio DJs to do ad reads for brands. And so for me, just trying to pull all of those pieces together and share with the advertiser or the prospect that, hey, this is a really powerful way to communicate, I think really went a long way.
Yeah, and it's something as well, advertising, and I come from a radio background. that almost is done in some mediums as it's almost as if the talent is embarrassed about it. Hold on, we've got to pay the bills for a minute, okay?
Hmm.
Don't pay attention to the man that's reading the ads behind the curtain. And really, I think what we've seen today here in 2026 in the creator economy is creators that have leaned the other way into it and they've embraced it and they've
Hmm.
really collaborated well with brands to help get results, but also, you and I have talked about this a lot. People trust the creators that they go and they consume from, whether it's a
Hmm.
YouTube channel, a podcast, of course, and they want their problems solved. And a lot of times a product can solve your problems, whether it's a kitchen gadget or a productivity tool or something like that. And
Right.
I think it's just a way that it's a bit of a misconception with advertising that, it is someone just hawking something, frankly. No, I mean, a lot of times it is something that can help improve your life or improve or fix a problem that you have.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the way I approach advertising in general. If it's done well and
Mhm.
if the product is a good fit for your audience, people like to buy stuff, right? Like we all live in the US, we buy plenty. And if you can buy something that's actually a really good fit for you, it's a positive, not a negative.
Yeah. How many times have we looked at that one thing that we've bought that we love and we say, man, I'm glad I bought that. I've got plenty of things in my home where it's like, this was just a great decision.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I totally agree. Speaking of great decisions, we're talking about the 10-year anniversary of True Native Media and you starting this business. Let's talk a little bit about turning points here. If you look across the decade, what do you see as turning points for True Native Media? Campaigns, partnerships, hires, events, those types of things that really stick out to you over the last decade?
So I think it's really interesting because I don't really feel like there's been a turning point. So for me, I feel like I've always been really motivated by accomplishment. And I also really love hiking. And when I think about hiking, part of the reason that I like to hike is because I want to get to the top of the mountain and I'm really motivated to get up there. And, as I was thinking about growing the company and what it kind of parallels for me, it parallels hiking. And the reason I don't feel like there's been a turning point for the company is because we've just seen steady, consistent growth throughout the years. I think that, as I mentioned, I have bootstrapped the organization, which I'm proud of. But that also means that I haven't raised millions of dollars of capital and said, like, oh, hey, I've got $3 extra million in the bank or $10 extra million. Like, let's hire 100 people to come and, blow this thing up. It's really just been consistent, steady progress over the years. And I'm really proud of that because at the end of the day, I think that the consistency of the organization is really where the foundation is. When I think in organizations, when you have just this rapid growth all of a sudden, when it does feel like, oh, wow, like, we've gotten to the other side of our goals, I think you lose a lot of momentum. And so for me, have we reached the pinnacle? Have we reached the mountaintop? Absolutely not. Like we're still striving and we're still looking toward that. But really, I think the consistency of the company is what I'm really most proud of.
Absolutely. And going back to when you started the company, what's something about running a company that no one told you that you wish they had? I'm sure there's a long list here of things you wish you had known, but what are a few?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, running a business is a trip. There's just so much that you have to do. And I think, I've been a business owner before. True Native Media is not my first company, but there are so many things as a business owner that you don't think about having to do and stuff that happens behind the scenes that even, team members aren't aware of. So there's a lot. But I remember at one point through this journey at True Native Media, I had a mentor say to me that people don't build organizations, teams build organizations. And that really hit me hard because I think as someone who is ambitious and likes to accomplish things, I want to do everything myself, right? Like I want to say like I know exactly how to do it. I can push through, I can accomplish a lot. And I can, right? But I can only accomplish what I can accomplish as one person. And I realized one day that I was holding the growth of the organization back because I was trying to be the person that did all the things. And at the end of the day, even at my highest level of productivity, I only have so many hours in the day. So if I'm allowing the company to grow as big as I am, then I'm holding the organization back in a really important way, right? Like I'm holding it back because I'm saying it has to be about me and everything has to go through me. And so I feel like the most important part of any organization is the team. And for me, I want a team of A players. And I feel like I am really proud that we've been able to assemble a group of A players. Well, that's not an easy task, right? It takes some effort to put together a team that's really dedicated to the organization and can really perform at a high level. And I mean, frankly, podcast advertising is not easy, right? We deal with 200 shows, which means 200 hosts. And, if you think that there are 4 or 5 advertisers per show, like the amount of information that our team is going through in a given day is, it's massive. And so it's really having that team and making sure that the team is on point is the hardest part about the organization, but also the best part.
What makes you the most proud when you think about the people behind the company? Of course, you're talking about the team that you've assembled across the last decade. Maybe it's when you started in 2016 all the way until today. But when you think about that, what makes you the most proud about the team and the people behind the company?
I think what makes me most proud is that they care about the organization as much as I do. It's important to me that we do things well, and we don't always perform at 100%, right? Like that's just not human nature. We're always going to stumble and fall down at some point. But I'm proud that everyone on the team cares about making it a strong company. And frankly, they're really dedicated to the organization. When you are working for a huge company, nothing wrong with working for huge companies. There's a lot of benefits there, literally. But when you work for a small organization, you don't have a lot of the bells and whistles, right? Like we don't offer pet insurance at True Native Media. I wish that we did, based on our resources. And so that means that the team that works here is really dedicated to our mission. And I love that. And I love it because I feel like when I interact with the team members, they care about the company and they want to see it succeed. They want to see our podcasters succeed and our advertisers succeed, and they want to support one another. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I think just to speak to that as well, I'm in a lot of the meetings that you're in as well. And, it always does grab me that most of the discussions that we have, and I would say even the discourse back and forth is not necessarily a disagreement on how to do something, but it's how best to do something because the team cares the most about getting something done the best. And we have a tremendous team, and we've, a lot of the success we have has been built on many of the people that have been with the organization throughout the last 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
And going along, you mentioned we have 200 shows. Let's talk a little about the roster, which has changed and grown and developed throughout the years. How has the roster changed the identity of True Native Media? And I would say vice versa as well.
So I feel like our roster's grown really organically. When I started, I had these particular verticals in mind. Like I want to, only sell ads in this vertical or that vertical. And over the years, we've really kind of just amassed a huge offering of shows. And, one of the, I would say the cornerstones that's been important is quality, consistent content. So if we're looking at a show and we know that they're creating quality, consistent content and they've got a nice size audience, then we're interested in partnering with them. And, I think one of the things that I really am proud of is that we represent a lot of independent content creators. So, we definitely have some rock star full-time podcasters, which I love. And we always want more of those, but we also represent a lot of podcasters that have full-time jobs. Maybe they're doctors, maybe they're attorneys, maybe they're, professors, or maybe they just have a real passion for productivity or a passion for, homeschooling their kids, right? There's so many voices out there that we're able to really represent. event. And I am honored that we can work with these smaller podcasts because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're helping this person support their passion by monetizing their show and allowing that voice to continue to be heard.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Our roster does span many different types of individuals, whether they are financial planners or professional podcasters. And I'm very proud of the individuals that we've been able to bring on that have gone professional in podcasting. I
Mhm.
think of a few shows that have emailed us and say, "Hey, I quit my job," which gives me palpitations at times, but also I love the fact that we've been able to do that for them. What do you think has kept creators and advertisers trusting True Native Media year after year? It's been a decade, of course. You've had many different relationships, both on the creator and advertiser side. What do you think keeps them coming back?
Sounds super corny, but I just really care about people. For me, forming good relationships is really, really important. I care about our team. I care about our podcasters, our advertisers, our strategic partners. One of our core values at True Native Media is people. And I want people to feel valued when they interact with us. One of my personal goals is that, after someone has interacted with True Native Media, and that could be in any form, right? It could be as a team member, it could be as a podcaster or advertiser, but that they come away feeling like, man, I'm really glad that I had an opportunity to work with True Native Media because their level of professionalism, their level of customer service was so high that I want to continue coming back. Now, of course, it's just like everything else. It's part of that striving to be the best that we can be. And, I know that there are days that we don't show up at our best, but I think more often than not, we do show up at our best. And really caring about people, I think, is really what sets our organization apart. I don't think that our podcasters feel like they're just a number in a sea of shows. They feel like they can, trust us and that we have their back, and they know that I'm available. If they have a question, they can come to me. They don't have to go through, 40 people to get to someone that's really going to be able to move the needle for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. The transparency that True Native Media has offered over the last 10 years is something that I think really is special in the podcast space. Let's talk about the next 10 years. When you think about the next 10 years of podcasting, what are you most excited about?
Definitely the technology. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that what has changed most is the technology, but what I'm looking forward to most is also more advancements. There are still so many things that we can do as an industry that would set us apart. And, we've seen so many changes, I think, with, some of the blurring of the lines between audio and video and, what exactly is a podcast. All of that, I think, is really interesting for the industry and is something that we need to really, just be thinking about. And the technology that can back up what we're creating and how we're showing up and how we're performing for, I always look at, the three pillars. You've got the content creator, you've got the audience, and you've got the advertiser. And when we look at those three segments, technology is going to continue to play a really strong role for all three and is going to get us to a place, I think, where we're able to just really fine tune the process on such a high level. As we've already mentioned back in the radio days, and obviously there's still a lot of terrestrial radio out there and a lot of terrestrial radio listeners, but the information that we had, when selling ads on a radio station was very, very limited. And I think that with digital advertising, we've been able to really hone in and get, just more information about what it is that we're doing and the results we're getting. And podcast advertising isn't quite there yet, but I do think that we're headed in that direction. And that's just going to continue to bring more and more advertisers to the industry.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think a lot of this has to do with technology, and I think once again, ease of buy for the
Hmm.
advertiser. We
Absolutely.
talk all the time about larger brands getting into the space, and I think all of that is how can podcasting make it as easy as possible for them to test the medium, see if it works, and then continue to spend if it does. From a long-term perspective, what is the long-term vision you're building toward as we move into decade number two of True Native Media? It feels almost odd to say that decade number two, but as we head forward into the second decade of True Native, what is the long-term vision and goal?
It's just really to continue to support content creators. As I mentioned, audio is a huge part of what we do, and we're going to continue to have audio be an important, piece. But content creators are content creators, and there's a lot of opportunity with video. There's a lot of opportunity with social. And so for me, it's really about honing in on the content creators that we can support, and then really being able to support them in a monumental way. So we're going to support them with audio, but how can we help support them with ad sales across the different verticals that they're creating in?
Yeah, and I think personally, from a company standpoint as well, it's continuing, as you mentioned, to just add to our offerings. We've talked a lot about different bundles that we can sell for podcasters, as well as how we can, from an operational standpoint, best support them. And I think just ease of use with us, with our clients, is something we're always looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, Heather, once again, congratulations, 10 years of True Native Media. But any final thoughts on the last 10 years of True Native Media as we kind of wrap up the episode here?
I'm just really proud, I'm proud of True Native Media, and I'm proud of this show too. When I started True Native Media, and I should say before I started True Native Media, I wanted to be a podcaster. And, that was my goal, was to start a podcast. And if I could go back in time and start a business podcast 10 years ago, that probably would have been smart. But at the time, I looked at it and I said, I could be a podcaster, or I could create a podcast business. And I think, obviously it was very lucrative for me to start a podcast business, and I'm glad that I did that. I wish I would have done both at the same time, but I really do love podcasting. I like creating content myself. I love supporting content creators. And just really contributing to the industry as a whole has been a real pleasure for me. And I'm excited to continue to do that.
Well, Heather, I appreciate, and as I said, I'm honored to be the one to get a chance to sit with you and reflect on the last 10 years. And of course, here's to 10 more.
Thank you, Nick.
This has been another episode of the Podcast Advertising Playbook, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.